What's up, party people? Survivor Episode 7 Strategic Analysis. You have Survivor Teek over here, and it's a cowboy season. And let's gear up and get ready to go because a lot happened. The merge delivered, and we had an amazing episode. And let's just get right into it and analyze some of the strategy that's been happening so far this season. First of all, let's give a moment to our boy, Xander. And if you weren't a Xander fan, you've got to be a Xander fan now. Sorry, but you can have this fake idol. That's going to be a line that goes down in history. How did this even play out? So, Xander was on the Yasa tribe, and he was trying to build alliances as best as he could with Evie, with Tiffany. Probably what happened when the tribe started to, when the tribes merged and they went together, was the Yasa people probably ended up on the outs. You saw them trying to build bonds with Nasir, with Erica, with different people, with Sydney. But at the end of the day, the way that it shook out was that it was the two people, Shannon and Ricard from UA, bonded with the six people in Luvu, as well as with Liana. So you ended up with this somewhat big majority alliance of 9 and this minority alliance of 3, is how the merge shook up. And I find that really interesting. Typically, you would see it where you just try to get enough to bring you over the edge, 7. But I feel like there were so many middle ground players this episode that they ended up just bonding with the majority alliance. So let's just kind of break down exactly how everything happened this episode. So Erica was on the island. She ended up smashing the hourglass as she should. There's no real strategic analysis to be had there. Safety is safety. You always get safety. Don't ever give it up. So what happened was that the main individuals who were who won the first challenge in the merge feast ended up being vulnerable and had to compete in the immunity challenge. And so Tiffany and Heather and Erica and Xander and a couple others, I think it was Shan and Liana, ended up being safe. And then everybody else was vulnerable. So we're talking about Ricard, Evie, Danny, Deshawn, Nasir, and Sydney. And so they had to compete in this challenge using their feet and trying to get like Jenga blocks up and then put a little flag in the middle. Not much strategy there. I think a lot of it is just trying to be as careful and balanced as possible. And a lot of it really just comes down to lower body, leg, and feet dexterity. You saw pretty close. You saw Nasir doing well, but it came down to Ricard and Sydney, and Sydney got screwed. I was cheering for Sydney. But she ended up being the last one to put the flag in there. So unfortunately for her, that was her death knell. And so you started to see the scrambles happening. And this is where we had this 9-3 split emerge. So it looks like the Danny, Deshawn, Liana, Shan foursome have solidified. It seemed like Danny, Deshawn were trying to protect Nasir, which is interesting how Nasir's moved up in the pecking order, even above Sydney. And then you also had it where, Ricard he had the immunity necklace by winning that challenge, so he wasn't vulnerable. So Danny, Deshawn, Sydney, and Nasir were vulnerable, but they're all in this loose Luvu alliance. So it seemed like Evie became the target. And the only people who were really standing up for Evie were Tiffany and Xander. Being loyal, and Liana lied. Liana over-lied this episode. It was interesting. You kind of saw Shan said that somebody has to get blood on their hands. Liana has all the blood on her hands in a very messy operation scene based on everything that went down this episode. So, not too great for Liana's strategy, trying to be the double agent, transparently so. And the entire strategy was entirely predicated on her having that secret advantage, the knowledge is power advantage, which Tiffany knew, and Tiffany told Evie, who told Xander, so everybody in the minority alliance, which Liana was betraying, already knew. So you had this 9-3 split, essentially, where even Sydney, she started to kind of catch a bit of a glimpse that, the target was coming against her, but she still bonded with the majority alliance. And it's fascinating to me that this majority alliance of 9 who come in with this plan, I just think this is poor gameplay. Unless they're not showing everything that happened through the edit. They came with this plan to get rid of Evie and hope that Xander's idol would have got stolen from Liana's advantage, which obviously was a big bust because of Xander's ultimate boss move of constructing that fake idol. And so it looked like he constructed this fake idol weeks ago, and or maybe days ago, and it just didn't show it on the actual edit. But I could see he was maybe trying to use this as a piece of trust to be able to even survive previous Yasa. If there was tribal council and he had to build something with Tiffany or Evie and say, look, here's the idol. Please trust me. Jokes, I'm going to use the real idol. So a fake idol, when you have the real idol, is actually a really strong move in the game. Because if people physically know you have it, which happened because of this whole twist where you have to say a catchphrase, and you have that idol, nobody's gonna bat an eye when you show them, here's the idol, here's a clue. And so that can be a really good bargaining chip if you do want to give somebody the fake idol. You've seen this, there's several seasons where this happened. I think Survive of Gabon was one of them, where Sugar made a fake idol, gave it to Bob, who gave it to Randy, and that was one of the factors that really played a twist in the fall of Coda, I think, in that season. And so you can use it pretty effectively as a bargaining chip beforehand to give it to an ally as a fake, or give it to an enemy to try to build trust, but really you actually have the real thing in your pocket. Xander used it a little bit more creatively and in a more fun, kind of bombastic way to actually show it off, to say, I'm going to use this idol on Evie and nothing's going to happen. And Liana felt hook, line, and sinker into it and ended up trying to steal Xander's advantage. Hey, no. Here's my fake. Real one's in Tiffany's pocket, which was smart because you would even think that the decoy play would be that he had given it to Evie directly. And so that Tiffany was a third wheel, and it almost seems too obvious. I was watching it with a friend, and then it was the same reaction, which was, obviously Tiffany has the idol, and we would think that as viewers. But I think probably the alliance structuring was just a little bit uneven. You saw some, for example, heroes versus villains, when they had to pick, okay, who has the idol? It's not going to be Parvati, but it was Parvati gave the idols to Sandra and Jerry. And there's always a little bit of, you tend to give the advantages to the lowest on the totem pole because it's the least to expect. And so, but people just didn't really know exactly if Tiffany was truly aligned with Xander and Evie enough. People thought that Tiffany and Xander had a bit of a tiff, which I did beforehand. So it was quite clever that those three were able to bond and survive unscathed. But let's talk about the next phase. After that, there were a lot of whispers. Sydney felt she was on the out. And the edit has done a good job deconstructing this, but I think there's a lot of different things that happened through all those discussions. So as mentioned before, there were only really 5 people that were vulnerable to this tribal council. Although like Deshawn was probably the good target for the Minority Alliance, and they were trying to get people to move over. And you saw one scene where Xander and Evie were basically telling Nasir, hey, Xander, Deshawn and Danny are gunning after you. Go after Deshawn too. And he's like, yes, let's vote Deshawn. And then I think he was trying to convince other people like Erica to vote out Deshawn as well. So really how it kind of shook out was there's the alliance of 3, the Yasa. And then as we know, there's like the core alliance of 4, Leanna, Shan, Deshawn, Danny. And then so that's 7. And then so you have kind of 5 people floating in the middle. Heather, we have no idea what her game is. Nasir and Erica are there. And then you also have Ricard, who seems right now to be loyal to Shan, which is fair from Ricard's viewpoint. And then you have, I'm missing one more. Then you also have, so you have Nasir, Heather, Sydney, Erica, and Ricard. So that's the 5. And so Sydney seemed to be the one who felt most vulnerable. And so she tried to bond a little bit more with the Yasa 3. Hopefully we're trying to get Nasir. Hopefully we're trying to get Erica. But I think part of this episode was the downfall of Sydney. All the people in the middle, we have reason to believe that they actually did want to target Sydney. Nasir caught her when Nasir was catching a few episodes ago, was chatting with Sydney about, hey, let's get rid of Deshawn. Let's get rid of Danny, and Deshawn will join us. And then Sydney completely snaked Nasir. And Nasir had this confessional where, she's a double agent. We've heard Erica's confessional where Erica wants to get rid of Sydney and was talking to Deshawn about it. Deshawn and Danny, I think, were made to look a little bit like the fools. Yasa's original, and when I say Yasa, I mean Tiffany, Xander, and Evie. Their original game plan was to break up what they perceived as a strong trio of Sydney, Danny, and Deshawn, not knowing that really Sydney's kind of gone from that and now it's Shan and Liana, but nevertheless, they kind of broke down at least 1/3 of that wheel, even though they were targeting Deshawn. But they were the ones in the middle, and it's fascinating because all of them could have just joined up with the Yasa 3 being Heather, Erica, Sydney, Nasir, and Ricard to get rid of this like visible alliance of four. But it looked like they found safety within that alliance of four because of all the loose connections that they all have. So then you try to create a split vote. The other thing too is there's like a million like advantages, some of which being additional votes. One's in Shan's pocket, one was in Xander's pocket that he gave to Tiffany, one was in Deshawn's pocket, which he ended up using. So we ended and then there's a whole shot in the dark, which Sydney used. So we ended up actually with a 5-4-3 split. Ordinarily, if there were no crazy advantages of shot in the dark, it would have been a 4-4-4, where Sydney seems to defect for her own safety and join the minority alliance. So she joined the Yasa 3. Presumably, she would have joined them to try to put a vote on Deshawn. It would have been 4-4 for Evie and Sydney, and then who knows who would have gone in the revote. We were led to believe it was Evie, but it's possible that Sydney was more of the target. So Sydney seemed to misplay it. Maybe she should have put her vote to Evie instead to create a draw and then cause a revote. That seems to be a consensus of what's happening in the conversations online. It was also kind of odd that it became 5-4 for Sydney instead of Evie. You saw Deshawn use his extra vote for Evie, which makes sense. So there's a couple theories to this as well, which I think we have to get fleshed out. One is that it looked like all the guys were voting to vote out Evie and all the girls were voting to vote out Sydney to create that vote split. So after it's a tie with the 4, then it'd be 4-5. But then Nasir might have been the one to flip and put the 5th vote on Sydney instead, just based on his personal relationship with Sydney, and he wanted Sydney gone specifically. In which case Nasir saves Evie, and Nasir comes to build some bonds with the Yasa 3. Would have been a boss move by Nasir, but I'm not sure if that really happened. The other idea is that Deshawn was forced to use his extra vote in the event that Sydney voted with the Yasa 3 and Tiffany used the extra vote that Xander gave to Tiffany. So then they would have 5 votes. There'd be a 5-vote voting block. And then that 5th vote would have been a draw. And so that's probably why that majority alliance tried to split it as the 5-4 in case that extra vote had been used. People probably don't know that Shan has her extra vote because that's the extra vote that came via JD. And so they probably don't even know about that extra vote. So Shan might be doing a good job keeping that under wraps. And so the majority alliance, let's call it the Deshawn core, that they'll broke their backs to try to protect Deshawn, this tribal council. They probably had this plan in place with this 5-4 split, the 5 being safety in the event that the extra vote was used. But that Yasa 3 plus Sydney alliance, they could have got out of it if they accurately picked the idol on the person who had the 5 votes, which in this case ended up being Sydney, in addition to the fact of the extra vote that Tiffany had in her pocket, so they could have 5 votes. Boom, they put the idol on Sydney, 5 votes on her, and then they have their 5 votes that beats the 4 votes to get Deshawn out. So they had a strategy. That got effed up because Sydney played her shot in the dark, which ruined everything. And I think her revealing that made Xander not willing to use his idol at all. Then it was a pick between Evie or Sydney to use the idol on which one. And it looked like Xander was considering that and instructing Tiffany the right way. But he guessed correctly in that it was more safe for them to put it on Sydney because it was more likely for Xander to play the idol on Evie. So I actually think that everyone kind of played it somewhat correctly. There were some flaws, but the strategy was kind of shown through Tribal. It was a little bit hectic. Sydney was the one on the outs. So what did Sydney do wrong strategically? And we're going to talk about this now that it's merged, and now that we get an understanding of every player's strategy. Sydney didn't have a number 1. Simple as that. If Sydney had a number 1, they would have fought for her in that majority alliance. It seemed like she was trying to be a 3 with Danny and Deshawn, but Danny and Deshawn themselves had mistrust to Sydney and seemed to be grooming Nasir as their 3. And so, like, Sydney can lament the twist as much as possible, but Danny, Deshawn, or Nasir all could have been targets. And frankly speaking, they ought to have been targets. Those 3 are, like, visible, male, strong competitors. Those are the people that people should be getting out when it comes to the merge, just because they can start to dominate challenges. Someone like Danny or Deshawn have very social vibes. Someone like Nasir already has an idol in his pocket, so he's a threat just based upon that. I don't know why Sydney didn't start to really, in advance, betray her blue and take a full approach in going against them. joining the Yasa 3 more solidly, and like she should have built a good relationship with Erica. Seemed to be the right person to build a relationship with, or Nasir, who she ended up snaking. She could have brought either Erica or Nasir or both over to her side. And if they were able to get a 5 or 6 person alliance, that would have changed everything for her as tribal council, as she could have been able to be safe. So Sydney really misplayed the merge. She likes to think she's an amazing player who was really screwed over. I think she's not. I think she'll go down in history as somebody who don't remember very well. And that was Sydney's game. And so, yeah, definitely a lot happened this episode. We're going to see how it all shakes out. It seems like the alliances still appear to be flexible, but I think if you're one of those middle players who's not in that core alliance of 4, you really need to think critically about whether or not to join the Yasa 3. The best strategy for the people in the middle, this being Erica, Nasir, Ricard, who I think are very strong strategic players, is to try to bounce back and forth between these two alliances. Still be a free agent, but try to make sure that there's shots thrown on each side and try to get through with a bit of a renegade cowboy approach. And that's the way to do it. So it's something you saw George do in his most recent season of Australian Survivor. Was effectively having a strategy, or a more, U.S. example is Rob Cesternino in Survivor Amazon. And it's playing the middle. It's tricky because if the two sides are able to bond, then they take out the middle. But these two sides seem so diametrically opposed in their approaches, especially with the whole Liana betrayal. I don't think they're going to be able to build that bridge. And so because of that big Liana betrayal, it really incentivizes you to play a bit more of a middle strategy. So it's interesting to see how that will play out. Danny is trying to need to get out to kind of weaken that entire side. Shan or Liana probably will need to get out as well. So those are probably going to be the first couple targets that I think the collective players should be thinking about. If you're Danny, Deshawn, Liana, Shan, it's to keep that core line strong. It's to start building those bonds. It's going to Erica. It's going to Heather. It's going to Nasir. It's going to Ricard, and really looping them into your core strategy. You're at a stage of 11, and so you need to start. You can really start kind of cutting some of the weight off too. Like try to find maybe of those 4, the 2 that you can really be the most loyal with, and loop them into a tight 6 to survive the next couple tribals. And then there's just so many twists. It almost incentivizes you to create these massive alliances. So their strategy is to probably keep this massive alliance strong and to keep Xander, Evie, Tiffany looking like some evil players, and you have to target them. If you're that minority alliance, if you're in Xander, Evie, and Tiffany's shoes, that's when you really go hard on the people who appear to be in the middle, Nasir, Erica, and say, look, that side doesn't care about you. They're a strong 4. Join us. They're 3. And so if they're able to bring in 3, you can say, look, we're a core 3. You 3 are the outsiders, and you guys can flip the script on us at any time. But just have a loose alliance for a couple votes to get those 6. And so Ricard is pretty tight with Shan, but if they are able to find those tensions and exploit them, that would be great. Because Ricard, Erica, and Nasir would be awesome. Who knows where Heather's game is at? Maybe it'll be Heather, Erica, Nasir. But those are the players to really look at, because this is really going to change the entire scope of the season. These players in the middle. So yeah, this has been a long episode, but yeah, big ups to Xander and Tiffany and Evie. I'm cheering for them, but good players on both sides. So let's see how this all shakes out, and we'll chat next week. Thanks.